been observing the Prime Minister, Liz Truss's first outing on the world stage as Prime Minister. Tell us how she has done. Will she be pleased to be back on UK soil?
Yeah, she landed back in the UK, in the last couple of hours, after a pretty busy couple of days here in New York at the United Nations. As you say, her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, really dominated largely, unsurprisingly, by the war in Ukraine, particularly after those remarks from President Putin yesterday. And she made a speech at the UN last night. And I have to say, there weren't that many people in the room. At the same time, Joe Biden was holding a reception for world leaders in the library across the road. Most of them decided that a drink with the US president was better than listening to the British Prime Minister, perhaps unsurprisingly. But Liz Truss pulled no punches in the speech. She talked about how Vladimir Putin was desperate with this war, that it had been a catastrophic failure, essentially implying that speech, that mobilisation of 300,000 troops in Russia, was a sign of the weakness, and that the West would prevail, that she felt that this was a moment of freedom, that 2022 would be an expression of that freedom for Ukrainian people, and that she's got their back. In fact, she's actually just issued a tweet in the last couple of minutes, again, insisting on this support that the UK has for Ukraine. And we saw that, didn't we, as well, alongside Joe Biden yesterday, reiterating the continuation and the cooperation between the US and the UK when it comes to the war in Ukraine, that they do have President Zelensky's back, and that is not going to change, they insist, anytime soon.
And some welcome news for her when she returns to the UK, Darren, specifically to do with the Ukraine. These 5 UK hostages, as they were called, others call them prisoners of war, they've actually arrived safely back in the UK and reunited with their families.
Yeah, this has happened at Heathrow this morning. Those 5 men who'd been effectively held hostage in eastern Ukraine, in the areas that have been controlled by Russian separatists, were freed after work, it seems, by the British government, the Saudi Arabians, and of course the Ukrainian authorities as well. They are Aidan Ashlin, John Harding, Dylan Healy, Andrew Hill and Sean Pinner. And what's really interesting about this, first of all, is just the work that has gone in. Many of them were aid workers in the region captured by the Russians. We don't quite know, though, really interesting, what type of deal has been struck here, why precisely they've been released at this stage, or indeed what the role of the Saudi Arabians has been in all of this. Or rather odd, maybe a question I will put to the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, when I interview him at the United Nations a little later on this morning here in New York. All I would add is that, unsurprisingly, Liz Truss is pretty pleased with all of this, saying that this ended months of uncertainty and suffering for the families. She thanks Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, for his efforts to secure the release of the detainees, and Saudi Arabia for their assistance. So a really intriguing story. We don't really know the full details, but clearly good news for the British government, and good news primarily for those families that have now been reunited with those men that have been held captive for the last couple of months in Ukraine. Much relief this morning at Heathrow Airport.
And Darren, the Treasury have just confirmed that that increase in national insurance that we all had to pay from April or May this year, it was introduced by Rishi Sunak. They've confirmed that that will be reversed from November the 6th. Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng has confirmed that ahead of tomorrow. We're told to expect tax cuts, possible lifting of the cap on bankers' bonuses. It's a massive gamble economically that she and her government are embarking on tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And in many ways, that's what Liz Truss wants to do. She has said repeatedly, hasn't she, Gloria, over the last couple of months during those hosting campaigns, that she wants to challenge the Treasury orthodoxy, that she wants to, in some ways, break with the orthodoxy that we've seen within the Conservative Party in its governing of the country for the last 10 years, with these significant tax cuts, in the hope, but she would say method, of trying to grow the economy much more quickly, to unleash capital, to ensure that we start to see money flow into the UK and growth return, which has been pretty anemic, actually, over the last 10 years or so. But you're right, you talk to lots of economists, they think this is silly. It's ludicrous. I say even economists. Clearly some within the Conservative Party think so too. We heard, didn't we, from Dominic Raab and Rishi Sunak during that election campaign. They thought this was a bad idea. We're going to have to see. It is a gamble. Of course it is. No one really knows. But frankly, Liz Truss is willing to do it, and she is willing, she says, to make some of these unpopular decisions now because she thinks it'll pay off in the long run. All I would add is, at the moment, the markets seem pretty unsettled by this. Look where sterling is. Yes, in part it's because the dollar's getting stronger, and it's not just sterling that's got weaker, but sterling's taking a real hammering. It's down below 113 today against the US dollar. It's not been like that for decades. So at the moment, the markets aren't convinced. We're going to have to see how all this plays out. But yes, economically and politically, this is clearly going to be the biggest gamble Liz Truss makes and will define her premiership.